Keith and I are sitting here talking about our trip out to the farm this evening for to have supper with Ruby. Invited us out there this evening for supper. And then as we sit there and reminisce about the farm, and I started thinking back, this is maybe a unique experience because I was born in that house in 1923, and here 89 years later, I'm still going out to the home farm, sitting in the same kitchen and the same living room where I was born and raised. So we started thinking, that's maybe a little bit different, because how many people have the opportunity to go back out to their home farm 89 years later? As we started thinking, I can't think of any of my relatives or friends that have that opportunity for that many years. And the same house is still there when I was born. The barn there, the granary's there, and some of the cottonwood trees that grew there when I was a little kid are still growing there after all those years. And some of the cottonwood trees probably are, they may be 100 years old, maybe more. Because they were always, when I was a kid out on the farm, they were always big then. They were always big trees. They weren't just small trees. They were big then. And that would have been that many years ago.
And then you're sitting...
So it's amazing that the house is there, and it's in good shape, and it looks good. And Ruby lives there, and that's her home.
Then you sit there and you see the vent up in the
I'm sitting in the kitchen and look up in the ceiling. The same vent going upstairs that warmed that room above us, our bedroom, is still there in the ceiling. And it's probably been there since my mother and dad first moved there in 1916. And we were talking about the kitchen stove was right on the wall next to where we're sitting, and the heat from the kitchen range, wood-burning kitchen range, would go up through that vent and furnish some heat for our upstairs bedroom winter time. So he sat there and looked, and it's still there after all those years. And many of my friends and relatives and their home place has probably been gone for many years. Or someone else moved there, so they don't visit there anymore.
Then you sit in that house and you got memories of...
And then when you sit in the house, you start thinking about memories of years ago, like maybe one instance where my sister Clarice was married there in that house in the depth of the Depression, 1933, 34, when there was no grass on the ground and no leaves on the trees, or it got drought and depression. So I think that if I remember, all my sisters were married in the house, because that was sort of a practice in those days that the pastor or minister would come to the house to perform a wedding if that's what they wanted, and then they'd have a pretty simple reception right at the house afterwards. And I always think about when my sister Clarice was married in Clifford Olson, that even as poor as they were in those days, in the middle of the Depression, he must have enough money to buy a box of cigars for a treat because I remember he gave me a cigar when I was 10 years old. And so we went out in the woods a ways, hid out in the woods down in the south end of our trees and fired up that cigar. And that was the first time I ever attempted to smoke a cigar. You know, I don't know, I remember that. It just sticks out. And I don't know if we got one each or if he gave us just one cigar for whoever the other boys about my age who were there at the time. There were some other people there at the wedding, you know, kind of a wedding reception. So, but I can't remember if we turned green or not. But anyway, that wasn't the first experience. Imagine 10-year-old kid smoking a big long cigar out in the woods. That was one of the memories we were thinking about sitting there in that farmhouse after 1933 or 34, you know, 60, 70, 75, over 75 years ago. And still, when you sit in the house that you were born and raised in, well, memories start popping up as you're sitting in there. So, anyway, that's one of our farm experiences. Watts, and we're sitting in the farmhouse talking, and I started thinking about my older sister when she was married, which would be 1933 or 34. You know, there was a poor that I think they probably had scrapped to get enough money to buy a marriage license. And I remember my sister and her husband, they moved into a small house about a mile and a half, or probably not quite that, from our home farm. And it was a little house. There was just one room. And we used to call it a corn crib because we thought it was so drafty because of the boards during the Depression shrunk something terrific in the houses. And I'm sure that the windows were drafty and all that. And so the first way And it was cold, blowing dust mostly. I don't get it. It's mostly dust storms. And they were way below zero. And they had a one-room house, and I think they had the bed and the kitchen and everything was in one room. And I think they fired that old kitchen range until it was probably jumping on the floor, trying to keep warm. And still they said they carried water in from the pump. There's no plumbing in those days.
Yeah.
They had to carry water in from the well, which the farmers did then. And that they'd usually fill up the water pail in the evening. And they said sometimes in the morning, there'd be ice on the water pail standing in the kitchen. And that's how cold it got at night. And that house was really drafty, and I thought, our farmhouse wasn't. It wasn't drafty. It was pretty solid, We didn't have to worry about. I don't think a water pail would freeze at night in the house. And there they lived the first winter, and I thought, oh my gosh, what a way to get started. And
did you ever go visit them?
Yeah. I'd maybe hike. I remember one time my mother was baking bread and she made quite a few loaves to make one, so she said, why, I'll pack up a bunch of loaves of bread here in this basket or whatever I carried. If you want to run across, I cut across the field. It was about probably a mile. I'd cut across the field. I didn't go around the road, and I'd go over there and visit. And so I remember one time that I did that. I probably visited her every once in a while. We'd cut across the field about a mile if the weather wasn't too bad. So, and I always kind of I'd go in there and I said, gee, just one room and the bed and the stove and the kitchen and the living room and everything wasn't just one. There was a little attic up there, which I don't know if anybody would survive if they slept up there in the wintertime. And then that was the experience of one of my sisters when they first were married. And it wasn't so uncommon in the mid-30s and early 30s that others had the same situation. They weren't the only ones, you know.
Yeah.
They're probably just barely surviving. And the jobs were about impossible for anybody to find.
Yeah.
And if you could find that, it probably was just barely a little more on board. I think probably they went and worked someplace down in southern Minnesota where they had some crops there that one year. I think they went down there and worked, and I don't know if they worked for board and room or. And my sister would work in the house, and he'd work out in the field helping out. But maybe they got paid a little bit for it. I don't know. But anyway, they survived.